there are numerous reports from Axios, Al Monitor, of Israel, and I know you want to get into this, Israel's retaliatory, that's how it's being framed across the Western mainstream media, retaliatory strikes on Iran. Now, there were explosions throughout October 20, I believe it's October 26th, actually, in Iran. Explosions near the defense ministry, supposedly, explosions across the country. And then there started to be reports about Israel conducting strikes. The IDF has said they are conducting strikes right now. Iran is saying that one of these strikes are very limited. They are combating them through their air defenses. And it seems that the U.S. is admitting to, and Israel, that this is all about hitting quote unquote military targets. So, Ben, given that there has been almost like a holding of a breath by much of the world about the future of a Israel-Iran war, and of course the United States' role, which the U.S. was sending F-16s to CENTCOM to send to Israel. Supposedly another THAAD system is going there, a second one, in order to bolster Israel's defenses. Talk about your assessment of this situation. It seems like, this is not only a major development, a very dangerous one, but also I think says a lot about where this burgeoning all-out war, a regional war, and global war, where it's all going.
What it does seem is that Israel is afraid of escalating further, which is obviously a good sign. It shows that Iran has been able to successfully establish a deterrent. Now, for weeks, the discussion was, will Israel attack nuclear sites in Iran? And Donald Trump was saying Israel should attack nuclear sites. Supposedly, Joe Biden said that he instead wanted Iran not to attack nuclear sites, but instead oil facilities, which is hilarious because this is an act of terror, right? I mean, oil facilities are civilian targets. And it also would be right before the U.S. presidential election. And if Israel were to bomb oil facilities in Iran, cutting off Iran's oil production, it would almost certainly lead to a massive increase in oil prices right before the U.S. election, which would be just a genius master strategy by the Biden White House. So it looks like Israel instead decided that it's only going to hit so-called military targets, which is quite surprising because usually Israel hits civilian targets constantly. But I think this is because Iran successfully showed that it has established a deterrent. It can hit Israel with the attack in which it used around 180 missiles and hit numerous important strategic military sites in Israel, including reportedly the headquarters of Mossad, the Israeli spy agency. So again, we're still speaking very early. It's hard to say exactly what's happening, but it does seem like this attack is not as bombastic, not as big as many people thought it would be. And I think that's a sign of Israeli weakness. The other point to mention, which you kind of obliquely referenced, is this nonsensical framing in the Western media claiming that this is an Israeli retaliatory attack, which, unless you have a time machine, unless you don't understand how history works and how time works, this is not a retaliatory attack. Iran's attack was retaliatory because let's not forget here, Israel has carried out numerous attacks on Iran over the past year. I mean, of course, going back decades, assassinating Iranian scientists and carrying out attacks inside Iran. But in particular, in the past year, Israel has carried out numerous attacks on Iranian soil. So first of all, in April, Israel bombed Iran's embassy, its consulate in Syria, which was an act of war according to international law. An embassy or a consulate is the national territory of whatever the country is that operates it. And then that was the previous Iranian retaliatory attack against Israel in response to that, the attack that Israel initiated. And then in July, Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, in Tehran, in Iran's capital, which was another act of war inside Iranian territory. And then Israel also assassinated a top Iranian general in Lebanon as part of this horrific attack in which it destroyed 6 entire high-rise buildings to try to kill Hezbollah leader Nasrallah. Israel also got less attention, but Israel also killed a major Iranian general. Imagine if Iran killed a major Israeli general, right? It would be all over the news, but when Israel does it, it's not a big deal. And then finally, we saw that Iran responded with the missile attack, 180 missiles. That was a retaliatory attack. And when Iran carried out this attack, they released a statement saying that our attack is legitimate and proportional according to international law. We have a right to defend ourselves. They even cited the UN Charter in the self-defense article. And they said, we have established a deterrent. We're done. We do not want to escalate further. So now Israel is the one escalating. It's by definition not a retaliatory attack. It's actually a new attack, an act of aggression. But the fact that I think it again, we'll see if it escalates further, but it seems like the initial attack was quite limited. So I think that, Israel got the message, and clearly it's not able to, they can see that Iran is a very powerful military force. Iran is quite a large country. And I think Israel has finally been a bit humbled, and it's used to just bombing women and children trapped in a big concentration camp called Gaza. And now that they're actually facing the potential of a war against a very serious adversary, it seems like they've taken a few steps back.
Yeah, that definitely seems like what is happening, and I think you're exactly right. It speaks to changed calculus. The first iteration of Operation True Promise 1, didn't succeed in all respects of establishing deterrence. Israel once again decided to conduct an assassination inside of Iranian territory, inside of the country. And that was just another red line cross. And now, according to Al Mayadeen's reports, as we are speaking, Ben, it seems to me that what Iran is saying is that whatever strikes were launched against it or have been launched so far against Iran have been intercepted. And what's so interesting is the U.S. is claiming that it has no involvement in this at all. But all day, as these explosions were being reported in Iran, these mysterious explosions, there were reports about CENTCOM continuing to send supplies, military supplies and armaments to Israel, these F-16s, tankers, all kinds of things going toward this direction. And we also had Antony Blinken rushing to the Middle East in what seems to be not just about restarting Gaza negotiations for electoral purposes, but also to, now that we know that Israel is actively targeting Iran, that there was obviously talks about making sure that this was limited, because as you said, there is an election coming up, and Benjamin Netanyahu said it quite plainly that this was going to happen before November 5th, as if to say, to stick it right in the eye. And there are some who claim that Israel's war maneuvers and war of aggression toward Iran has a lot to do with also weakening the U.S. position, because we've talked a lot about who's wagging the tail here. And I think we're both on the side that the United States indeed has that power, has that ability. But also that doesn't mean that Israel isn't going to try to pressure the United States with all it has to do what Israel thinks is in its best interests, which it seems to be war on Iran, whether that's correct or not. But Ben, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, a few points there. First of all, we should just think about the different size between Iran and Israel, just for comparison. So we don't know exactly how many soldiers Israel has, but I haven't seen many estimates that go above 200,000, a bit under 200,000, whereas it's widely estimated that Iran's military is nearly 1 million. Iran's population is over 90 million. So, I mean, Israel loves to bluff about how it can take on all of these countries and wage war against all of its neighbors, but they can know basic math, and they can see that 1 million is much larger than 200,000, and it would be a complete disaster. Not to mention the fact that, again, Israel is so used to just bombing women and children trapped in Gaza and fighting against Hamas militants who have very low-level technology, very basic missiles, whereas Iran is a very advanced military, and actually fighting a conventional war is very different. Considering that, I know we're going to talk about Lebanon, and Israeli forces are being devastated by the Lebanese resistance because, again, they're cowards and they're not used to actually fighting, in particular on the ground, against trained combatants. They're used to just bombing women and children in their homes. So the idea that Israel could take on the Iranian military is laughable. I mean, it's just a joke, especially after, in Lebanon, Hezbollah and also Iraqi forces and Iranian forces were hardened in the fight against ISIS. And imagine how brutal it would be to fight against ISIS. I mean, the soldiers and the combatants who were trained in the years of that process, they are more than willing to defend their countries against Israel. Whereas you have all these Israeli soldiers who are complaining because they don't have the right food or whatever, and they're complaining that they don't have vegan boots or whatever. Imagine them fighting. It's just a joke. Like, that's why Israel just constantly resorts to bombing people trapped in their homes. They can go nowhere. Now, to the other point about the U.S. role, it's very clear, largely because the U.S. election is coming up, that the Biden administration has been telling Israel, you cannot escalate this further. Also, because if there's a full-on regional war with Iran, it would be a disaster for you, it would be a disaster for us. And I think what's also fascinating is how, Blinken has spent basically half of the year in Israel. He's taken over a dozen trips to Israel, constantly going back and forth, telling Israel, you have to do this, you have to do that. And Drop Site News, which is a new platform founded by some people who left The Intercept, they published an incredible report from some internal Israeli sources that shows that Blinken has been sitting in on these meetings and giving a green light to Israel, saying, you can attack this, you can attack that, you can't attack that. And Blinken, according to this report, again, citing internal Israeli sources, Blinken approved Israel launching attacks on humanitarian aid trucks. And now we've seen, even the mainstream corporate media has acknowledged in the past few weeks that Israel is not even allowing any of these trucks in anymore after previously bombing them, attacking them. I mean, they're trying to starve Gazans. They're preventing food aid from coming in. But the point is that Blinken is directly complicit, according to this report. And now we know what he's talking about in this over a dozen meetings that he's had, trips he's taken to Israel. He's sitting in with top Israeli officials. He knows what they're doing. I mean, this idea that the Biden administration has that supposedly, oh, it's just all Netanyahu. No, that's nonsense. Everything that Israel is doing, the U.S. knows. Not only because Blinken is sitting in these meetings, but come on, let's not be naive. The CIA knows everything that Israel does. We talk about, Mossad's powerful spying abilities, but the CIA definitely has all of these assets. And basically, Mossad is part of the CIA. I mean, Mossad and CIA are part of the same kind of network, international network of terror and espionage and regime change plotting and war. So the U.S. knows all of this. And then not to mention the fact that the Biden administration has given $18 billion in military aid in 1 year. 17.9 billion is the official number. And that's probably a conservative estimate. It's the official number in just 1 year. I mean, that's absolutely amazing when you think about how much money that is. Now, of course, when you compare it to Ukraine, the U.S. has been spending so many billions and billions of dollars funding all of these wars that we've become desensitized to the amount of money, but it really is shocking. So, of course, the Biden White House, with the election coming up, they clearly told Israel, you can't start a whole-on regional war with Iran. We're going to lose the election. And it seems like Israel did get the message and took a step back. But of course, I don't think it's just because of that. We also talked about how Iran is a very serious adversary. Israel is already losing soldiers in the fight against Lebanese resistance forces, which are much weaker. I mean, they're still very well trained and battle hardened, but compared to the Iranian military, Hezbollah it's a formidable force, but it's not like the Iranian military, which if Israel were ever to fight a war against Iran, probably both sides would be destroyed. I mean, of course, Israel would try to destroy Iran, but it would not go well for Israel either.
No, it wouldn't. And I think your point about the sizes of these militaries is a really good one because I was doing some quick research and you're exactly right. Iran's military is about 650,000 active, about 350,000 reserve, so equaling 1 million. Then on the Israeli side, according to the Wall Street Journal, it is much smaller. We're talking about 170,000 active at most. The majority, which has come up in the fighting in Gaza, the genocidal campaign in Gaza, the ground campaign, it has come up as being a big problem that they rely mostly on reservists, 4 to 5 times the number of active personnel. That only increases every time they go deeper and deeper into just Gaza alone. So uh, Israel obviously cannot fight some kind of ground game, not to mention the geographic issues that they would have to deal with. But even in this attempt to bomb Iran, which John Bolton, you've written so much about, is always calling for, and it seems like Antony Blinken is helping coordinate where Israel can bomb. Even doing that negates the fact, and Iranian officials have said this over and over, that they have also the ability to shoot down Israeli, not only Israeli strikes, but also Israeli jets if they end up coming into their territory. So it's not an easy war at all, and I think you're right. It would lead to massive destruction on both sides and probably everywhere, because I don't think an Israel-Iran, a U.S.-backed Israel-Iran war could be contained. It's geographically, it makes absolutely no sense. And we've been talking about the axis of resistance a lot, and how any kind of conflict with Iran would only intensify that resistance manyfold. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing constant attacks on the U.S. troops who are illegally occupying Syria by Syrian resistance forces and also by Iraqi resistance forces. There have been attacks on the U.S. troops who are illegally occupying Iraq as well. So just to emphasize those points, this might surprise people who don't know because it's almost never mentioned in the media. The U.S. has been illegally occupying about 1/3 of Syrian territory for years now, including the most oil-rich area that also has a lot of the wheat fields, to try to starve the Syrian government of the oil revenue and food, to try to collapse the Syrian economy. This is the stated goal of the United States. Top U.S. officials have admitted that. They want to starve the Syrian government of revenue. And of course, the U.S. also has these devastating criminal sanctions on Syria that violate international law, the so-called Caesar sanctions. And the U.S. is also still occupying Iraq. 20 years after the illegal U.S. invasion of Iraq, there are still U.S. troops there. Obama claimed that he ended the war, but the troops never left. And let's not forget that in 2020, Donald Trump assassinated not only Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, but he also, at the same time, assassinated the top Iraqi military commander, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was a leader of the PMF forces that helped to defeat ISIS. So, Qasem Soleimani from Iran, the top general, and al-Muhandis from Iraq, together, these were two of the most important figures in defeating ISIS. And Trump, he thanked them for defeating ISIS by killing them. And then now Biden has backed Israel, which just killed Nasrallah, who also helped to defeat ISIS. These were the three main people who defeated ISIS. Hezbollah, Iraq, and Iran, and their leaders were assassinated. So, and by the way, there was a report this week that Al-Qaeda it basically has been supporting Israel, and Al-Qaeda called on Hamas to free all of the captives of war and give them back to Israel. So Al-Qaeda and ISIS just conveniently always happen to be on the side of the U.S. and Israel. What a coincidence. And then they always happen, and the U.S. and Israel always coincidentally kill the major enemies of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. What a coincidence. But anyway, getting back to this point. So after Trump assassinated this top Iraqi military commander on Iraqi soil, an act of war against Iraq, the Iraqi parliament voted to expel the U.S. troops occupying the country. Trump refused to. He threatened sanctions on Iraq. Biden came in. He claimed, I'm going to reverse Trump's policies. Of course, he didn't. He continued those policies, which are bipartisan. And the U.S. has continued militarily occupying Iraq, which explains why there have been constant attacks, not just in the past year, but going back years. Every few weeks or a month or so, there's another attack on the U.S. troops in Syria and the U.S. troops in Iraq. And then the U.S. uses this as an excuse to constantly launch airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. And these are not just Israeli attacks. If you look, in the past year, the Biden administration has bombed Iraq. They say that they're no longer at war with Iraq. Why are they still bombing Iraq? They say we have to defend their soldiers. Well, why are your soldiers there? They're occupying the country because you're at war with Iraq, and you're at war with Syria, and you're at war with Iran, and you're at war with Yemen. I mean, the U.S. and Israel are at war with so many countries in the region. Now imagine if they escalate to a whole new level and it's a full-on war with Iran. That means that these forces in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, they're not going to hold anything back. They have been very measured, very tempered in the attacks that they've carried out against the U.S. military occupiers and against Israel. But if Israel escalates into a full-on war with Iran, there are no more limits. Everything, they're going full out. And then Hezbollah is going to launch massive missile strikes against Tel Aviv. Because Hezbollah has also been holding back, only responding not even proportionately, less than proportionately. If you look at a chart, this has been reported in mainstream media, look at a chart of the cross-border attacks between Lebanon and Israel. Israel has no real borders, but it has never defined its borders. But the so-called borders of Israel, if you look at the cross-border attacks between Lebanon and Israel in the past year, Israel has carried out about 8 times more attacks on Lebanon than Lebanon has carried out against Israel. But if they escalate into a full-on war, every force in the region is going to go all out. They're going to use all the missiles they have, all the drones they have. And Israel would be devastated. So I think they've gotten the message here. And again, I need to stress this point. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but Israel is so used to bombing women and children trapped in the Gaza concentration camp, bulldozing homes in the West Bank, imprisoning children who are throwing stones. These are soldiers who do not have morale. They're not committed. They complain about minor little inconveniences. They are not willing to sacrifice their lives to fight against hardened, trained foes who are defending their countries. The Lebanese are defending their countries. The Yemenis are defending their country. The Iranians would be defending their country if there were this war. We've already seen in Israel this massive exodus of these people just fleeing because a lot of them have dual passports. They're going to the US, Canada, Europe, Australia. And if there's an actual war, we're going to see many more leave.
Yeah,
because, it's not just Israel constantly says we have the best technology. The US says we're always going to give Israel the qualitative military edge. That's their favorite phrase, qualitative military edge. But what we found out is that just because you have the most advanced technology, just because you get tens of billions of dollars of military assistance from the US, you can't make up for the differences in size, the differences in morale, the differences in training level. We see this in Ukraine. The US thinks that they can just pump Ukraine full of advanced technology and they'll win the war. And we see that it's been a complete disaster for Ukraine. And Israel also, it's so arrogant. It thinks we can kill everyone because it has advanced technology. It can take out leadership. But taking out leadership, as we've seen, is not defeating Hezbollah, because this is an organization like Hamas, like other resistance groups in the region. They know that Israel is going to try to kill their leaders. So for every single leader, they have assistants and they have multiple backups who can take their place to continue fighting. And that's why Israel cannot win. The only solution is genocide and ethnic cleansing, or surrender, or finally allowing the people of the region to have sovereignty and equal rights, giving Palestinians sovereignty. Because as we see in Gaza, they're trying to ethnically cleanse the northern part of Gaza and push out all of the Palestinians. That's their only solution. But that's not a solution in the medium to the long term, of course, because that resistance will still continue unless they eliminate everyone, which, of course, some of them want to do. Some Israeli officials have said we should just starve all 2 million Gazans. But unfortunately, they say the international community won't let us carry out this mass genocide against everyone in Gaza.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, Ben, there are reports now in the Jerusalem Post. This is very interesting, given that Iran is reporting that these strikes that we're talking about have indeed been limited and have been thwarted in many respects, if not all respects. And here we have Israel. This will, I think you will. We should be very angry, of course, that Israel is just absolutely disgusting behavior. It's war criminality. It's genocidal campaign. But this, Ben, this Jerusalem Post reports Israel strikes Iran. Is deterrence the key to prevent an all-out war? The ball is back in Tehran's court. If Iran is not deterred, further escalation may be necessary. This is literally an admission, Ben, that these strikes have now happened. Whatever. I mean, I'm still confused about what exactly they were, but now they're saying, now this is coming from Israeli media, which, to be frank, Jerusalem Post is a mouthpiece of official Israel, and they're saying now that this was all about deterrence toward Iran, and that now Iran has to, has to be the one to either respond or not, and the ball is in their court. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, but I think this demonstrates many things that we've been talking about. Ben, final comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so funny seeing the Jerusalem Post, this Israeli propaganda outlet, saying that the ball's in Iran's court to see if Israel has established deterrence, when in fact I think it's Iran that has established deterrence, right? Israel would love to continue escalating, but the fact that Iran has established deterrence and shown that, unlike women and children in Gaza who can't defend themselves, Iran can defend itself very capably. The other point to respond to briefly is that you mentioned the Jerusalem Post being a mouthpiece for Israel. We should always keep in mind, this is almost never mentioned in the Western media. The Israeli media is completely controlled by the government, and there's this idea, Israel says we're the only democracy in the Middle East, which is absurd. It's not a democracy, and there are other countries in the region that are quite democratic, including Lebanon, which they're attacking right now. Despite all of the problems Lebanon has, it's much more democratic than the Israeli regime. Iran is much more democratic than the Israeli regime. Iran just elected a new president who was from the reformist movement, which the West loves to claim that the Iranian regime doesn't allow people to have a voice. Well, they just elected a new president from this reformist movement. Anyway, the point is that part of this narrative that that Israel is supposedly the only democracy in the Middle East is the West says, look, Israel has a free press. It's not a free press at all. Of course, the U.S. doesn't have a free press either, as we see. It's controlled by the Pentagon and CIA, and they use it to spread disinformation and justify wars of aggression. But the point is that Israel has a very aggressive military censor that controls all information that can be published about the war that it's carrying out in Gaza, on Lebanon, on Yemen, on Syria, on Iraq, on Iran. So we're likely to only know a small percentage of what's actually happening, and in these reports, like in the Jerusalem Post, and what they're really, that report you cited, that's the voice of the Israeli military, right? That's the narrative that they're trying to get out. So it seems like from that report that Israel is kind of saying that they can't say it publicly, because then it would, Iran said it publicly when they did this retaliatory attack in self-defense. Iran said, we don't want to escalate. We're done. Our attack was proportional according to international law. Israel can't say that publicly because they're run by these far-right maniacs who are just, they want everyone in the region to fear them, to see them as, these unstoppable fascist juggernauts who can kill anyone in their path, and these bloodthirsty maniacs who are willing to kill anyone in their path. And that's who they are, right? Like, right. They are those things, but they need to maintain that bravado. They can't admit that they don't want to escalate because they're afraid of the repercussions. So I think a report like this is an indirect way of them saying, now the ball's in Iran's court, which is actually what Iran had previously said. And so I don't expect Iran to retaliate further, which would actually be a retaliatory attack, right? Because this is how these things work. This is how time works. It goes in a line. Israel attacked, Iran responded. Israel attacked, Iran responded. Here we are again. Israel has attacked, but Iran has showed a lot of strategic patience. We talked about that in previous streams. And I think that at this point, they're probably going to allow the Lebanese resistance and the Palestinian resistance to defend themselves, and the Yemenis. But of course, Iran is not going to just sit on its hands. Iran is still always providing military support and intelligence support to these resistance forces in the region.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.